Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Welcome back, adventurers. Today we are going to rank the subclasses for the Barbarian. Before jumping into the rankings, I'm going to show you the criteria like I do in all these videos, in case you haven't watched any of the previous ones, or just if you need a reminder. So hopefully this will just be a quick refresher for people, but for those new to my ranking videos, let's dive in. I will be ranking the subclasses from S to D. The subclasses are going to be ranked against each other, not against other classes. So, an S rank for Barbarian doesn't mean that I'm comparing it to an S rank in, Bard or Cleric or whatever else may be ranked already or in the future. So what is an S? An S is a subclass that's just mechanically stronger, specifically in combat, than other subclasses. They're still going to be good in other pillars that the class is already good in, so it's not going to take a hit because it's not amazing in social pillar when they have nothing about the class that's good in social, but definitely mechanically stronger in combat, since that's where most people tend to play the game. A is a subclass that's still very strong in combat, but unlike the S, doesn't become almost like a default pick or just far outshines the others. Instead, it's just a very strong combat and team-focused subclass. And this is where I'd like to see subclasses live. This is the ideal level for a subclass in my mind. And A will really lean into the strengths of a class without ignoring everything else completely. B is a subclass that's still mechanically strong in combat or good at boosting the party, but usually not both, and it's usually only really strong in certain campaigns. So it might be a subclass that's all about destroying elementals, but that only comes up if you are in a game that's all about destroying elementals. It means it can still be good in other scenarios. It'll never be bad, but it just really shines in very specific campaigns. C is the subclass that lands here because it's just not very strong. It's fine. You'll still be okay playing it. It won't necessarily feel bad. And there may even be a very niche way to play it that's really interesting. But generally speaking, if you just pick it up and build it without a lot of care about how you put in your feats or what you're doing with your character, it might not shine like the others do. And this is what I consider a trap. This is a subclass that looks maybe kind of cool on paper or has something niche about it, but when you really try to play it, it's very hard to actually get anything out of. It doesn't feel good as you play it, and you feel like you ended up wasting your choice by taking this subclass. All right, fantastic. Well, let's get into the Barbarian then. With the Barbarian, given the remaster and Rage of Elements, we have 7 subclasses to rank, which is a nice healthy number, just like the Druid had. These are referred to as instincts in the class. The instincts are Animal, Dragon, Elemental, Fury, Giant, Spirit, and Superstition. I'll walk through each instinct, discuss its strengths, combat and counterplay styles, benefits for other types of play, and then give it a final rating. But before we can get into the subclasses, we have to talk about what kind of benefits we get from our subclass. All right, so we start out at level 1 with our instinct ability. Now this varies a little bit, but it's all about when you're raging, what kind of boosts do you get? Part of this can be damage, extra damage to your rage bonus damage already, or it could be other effects that you get on top of your damage when you do rage. At level 7, your specialization, this is really about, generally speaking, your increase in rage damage. What does it look like at level 7, and then what does it look like at level 15? And then finally at level 9, you get your raging resistance. So this is an amount of resistance equal to 3 plus your constitution modifier against some type of damage specified by the subclass. Some of these subclasses do have an anathema, and these are problematic when they come up because they can really restrict what's available to you and how you can play. But work with your GM, they may not care about the anathema much, but it is listed sometimes, so we will talk about it. Feats. Each instinct gets access to between 2 and 7 feats tied to their instinct. Now, you don't have to take these, obviously, but some of them are very strong and really do set the subclasses apart. But you can tell by that difference in number, 2 to 7, that it can vary quite a bit instinct to instinct. All right, well, let's kick off with the animal instinct. So at level 1, you're actually not going to get a damage boost from your rage damage, which is unique to animal, but you get to choose special unarmed attacks that you gain when you go into a rage that mimic the animal you've chosen. So there's a nice table here that you can see, and they've actually added 2 tables since they added one for Heart of the Wild. When you enter a rage, you gain access to this or these, depending on one or more, unarmed attacks that are related to your animal. Now, you're only going to choose the animal one time, so choose carefully. The interesting thing is that these are very strong unarmed attacks with traits on them that are very, very useful. So even though you don't get a bonus in your rage damage, you get very interesting options that are even hard to find on actual weapons if you can. All right, level 7. At level 7, your damage bonus from rage goes from 2 to 5. And then at 15, you'll go from 5 to 12. Now, this is the low end. This is the least rage damage bonus of any instinct. But the cool thing about animals specifically is those unarmed attacks you got at level 1, their die size increases by 1 level. So if you had a D10 before, now it's a D12. If you had a D6 before, now it's a D8. All of those increase in die size, which is kind of its own damage boost, because on average, that is 1 extra damage per attack. So it's kind of like going from 2 to 6 and, 6 to 13. So you can think about it that way. At level 9, your raging resistance is resistance to piercing and slashing, full stop. So any piercing and slashing. Since the most common damage types in the game are piercing, slashing, and bludgeoning, this is pretty good resistance. They have one of the best, if not the best, resistance of any instinct. All right, let's dive into the feats here. There are 7, which if you remember, that's the top end. They get more feats than any other instinct, and they're very interesting. Now, not all these came in Player Core 2. Some of these came with the more recent book, but all should be available to you. Just make sure to check in with your GM. So starting at level 4, we have Brutal Crush, which is 1 action. You attack a creature that you just hit with bludgeoning. So you hit them, and then you're going to take this attack as your second one. If you hit again with this other attack, not only do you deal damage, you also make the creature stupefied 2 for a round. It's only a round, but stupefied 2 is actually really strong against spellcasters. Granted, it's only really good against spellcasters, so it's not going to come in useful all that much because we don't see all that many spellcasters in Pathfinder as regular enemies, so just keep that in mind. Creature Comforts, this is also at level 4. This is a reaction when you become frightened. You get to reduce your frightened value by 1. It's just straightforward. I would say this is more niche because you have to wait for a certain condition to happen, but this is frightened. And frightened is one of the most common conditions, not as common as being off guard, but boy, is frightened very common thanks to Demoralize. Enemies do it all the time too. I would expect this to come up. So this is actually a pretty solid feat. Being able to immediately remove your frightened value, or at least if you're frightened 1 or reduce it by 1 either way, is actually pretty good. Rip and Tear. This is kind of the other side to Brutal Crush. So this is for piercing and slashing damage. It's 1 action, level 4. Again, same idea. You attack a creature with piercing or slashing damage. Then, this action, you attack again. And if you hit with your piercing or slashing damage, you get to deal 1d6 persistent bleed damage as well. Or 2d6 if you're 12 or higher. Now, this is nice because it doesn't matter who you're fighting. As long as they're capable of bleeding, extra bleed damage is great. Persistent damage is not easy to get rid of. And 1d6 or even 2d6, it'll add up if the creature's going to live for a few rounds. Animal Skin, this is level 6. While you're unarmored, you gain a +2 to your AC with a +3 maximum from Dexterity. So it's kind of like wearing certain types of armor, but you're unarmored. And any potency runes that you have on Explorer's Clothing or Bands of Force or any items like that still work. So it still feels pretty solid. Animal Rage, this is level 8, 1 action. While raging, you shift into the form of your chosen animal. So let's say you chose deer at level 1, you can actually shift into a deer following the criteria in the animal form spell. In this case, you retain, though, your stats rather than having to take the animal form stats from that spell. You retain your unarmed attacks and your temporary hit points, but you do get the rest of the effects of the spell. So any constant abilities from gear also work, but if there are nice bonuses from the spell, and there are, that come with changing form into that animal, you get those. So it's kind of a best of all worlds. Animalistic Brutality, also at level 8, but passive this time. you can add one of a set of different weapon traits onto the unarmed attack you already had from level 1. So let's say you had an unarmed attack with the grapple trait. Well, maybe now you can tack on forceful. The actual list is here in the feat, so you can see which ones you can add on, but it adds more versatility onto already quite versatile unarmed attacks. And finally, at level 12, we have Predator's Pounce. This is one action. It's a flourish, so keep in mind you can only do one flourish action per turn. You can move up to your speed and then strike all for one action. So this is just pure action compression. Great. For one action, run up and strike. Nothing crazy, but really useful. Always useful. So as you can see with all the feats and front-loaded feats for Animal Instinct, there's a lot you can build on top of this instinct. They cover offensive and defensive options, which is nice. A lot of offensive, but there's some defensive in there. What I really like is how thematic they are. There's great tight theming within this instinct specifically. The unarmed strikes tie back into the animal you chose, and you've got this really strong base instinct ability, I think, which outdoes a lot of even things like monk stances, where they might get something that's not as strong as this. Having said that, while this is great, you get no rage damage bonus at the beginning, and your other rage damage bonuses are pretty lackluster. And keep in mind that as a barbarian, your big thing is dealing damage, like physical melee damage. So you really do want to hit as hard as you can. Also, the type of damage you do is always your unarmed strike damage type. So you're going to be doing that piercing, bludgeoning, or slashing damage always. There's no other type of damage that's in here, and it's hard because you can't trigger weaknesses, and if they're resistant to physical damage, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, there is a playstyle that really works well with Animal, and that is the Grappler playstyle, which is itself very strong. And this is probably the best to go if you want to be a Grappler. Maybe Giant, you could argue, is better if they had a weapon with the grapple trait on it, but you really are probably the best Grappler from the beginning of the game as far as Barbarians go, which is nice. You've got some advantages there. So you're a good team player in that way. Well, nothing here is specifically focused on your allies unless you do a grapple build. The grapple potential really does matter here, so I do take that into account. The lower damage, though, and having only one type of damage, but some versatility in the feats, we're going to see that there's a lot more versatile things you can do with some of the other instincts. To me, this is a B. Nothing truly amplifies or augments what a barbarian can otherwise do, and there are some campaigns where this is amazing because you can constantly be up and grappling on top of creatures, or you can use your animal abilities quite well here, but it just doesn't excel beyond that in any particular way. All right, next up is the Dragon Instinct, where you are going to gain the powers of a dragon if you take the feats. So at level 1, you're going to choose one of the new 8 dragons from the remaster. So you can see all the types here, and each of them has their own type of breath weapon damage. Keep that in mind because that's going to play a role in everything you do with this subclass. At level 1, your rage damage goes from a bonus of 2 to a bonus of 4, and the type of rage damage bonus changes to the type of the breath weapon. So let's say you go with a type of dragon that has a force damage type for its breath. That 4 damage from your rage bonus is now force, which is very cool. At level 7, your damage bonus from rage goes from 4 to 8, and then from 8 to 16 at level 15, which is very strong. It is not the highest, but it's the second highest, and it's going to feel real good. You're going to hit hard. Your raging resistance at level 9 is you get piercing, just like Animal did. Again, very strong. And the other one is the type of the breath weapon for the dragon you chose. This probably isn't as strong. I mean, maybe if you chose something like fire, then like Diabolic and gotten fire, then maybe this will show up more often. All right, let's jump into the feats. The Dragon Instinct has 4 feats available to him, starting all the way at level 1, which is unique. At level 1, there's Draconic Arrogance. This just gives you a passive +2 to all saves that you make against emotion effects. This will help against fear more than anything else, but probably won't come up that often, so I don't think it's the greatest feat pickup, but it's just an option. At level 1, there's much better options than this. Dragon's Rage Breath. Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is level 6, and it is 2 actions. You exhale a 30-foot cone of damage, which matches the Dragon's Breath damage type for the dragon you chose. So if that dragon does force damage, you do force damage. The damage it deals to every creature in the cone is equal to a number of d6s is a number of d6s equal to your level. Now, this isn't like fireball level, but it's not far behind. It keeps up pretty close. You get to damage. Now, every creature in the cone gets a reflex save, basic reflex save stuff. So, hey, great. If they crit fail, double damage. If they succeed, they're still taking half damage. And it's against your class DC. You can only use it once per 10 minutes, but that usually is still quite often. Usually you get downtime, even if it's just 10 minutes to heal up, refocus, whatever, between combats. Yours will come back. Otherwise, you might have to go 2 combats and only use it once. Still pretty often. At level 12, you get Dragon's Rage Wings. This is 1 action, and while you're raging, for 1 action, you grow wings and you can fly with speed equal to your normal movement speed. And it stays active while your rage is active. And then even if your rage ends and you're in the air, you get to float down safely and touch down rather than falling, taking damage, and landing prone. You have suddenly become the most mobile barbarian out there. You can do things that a lot of martials can't by getting airborne. This is really quite strong. Don't underestimate what flying can do for you in this game. And finally, at level 16, we have Draconic Transformation, also an action. While you're raging, you become your chosen dragon. You just get the effects of the Draconic Transformation spell, which is a 6th level spell, but you get to keep your own attack modifier, your own AC. These are better than what the dragon would have probably had, by the way. You can add your rage damage to the attacks you do in this form, as well as the damage, bonus damage from the Draconic Transformation attacks themselves. So you're going to hit very hard. And you can add the spell's temp HP, because Draconic Transformation has bonus HP, has temp HP you get when you cast it, and that adds on to your rage HP. So you get all the bonuses of being the dragon, you get their breath weapon, even though it goes against your own class DC, you get their flight, their size. All of this is fantastic. At level 18, you're going to get some other bonuses that will increase, just like the spell could have. It is cast at higher level. Now you can only do this once per 10 minutes as well, which is great because it's not once a day. I think this is another very strong feat. Dragon is an interesting instinct. It has high rage damage, only losing out to giant. You have a different rage damage bonus type, which is nice because you can get around resistances, immunities, and possibly trigger weaknesses. The feats really set it apart, though. Being able to fly, transform into a dragon, do an AoE damage effect, these are things that barbarians are naturally very, very bad at, while still not losing what they're good at. Strong single target damage. You are hitting everything all at once. You don't have a true ranged attack, but you are the ranged attack, right? So once you can fly, you can do things like, dash twice and then hit. All these things that barbarians normally do on the ground, now you do them in the air. There's even a slim possibility that you could use some of these things outside of combat. Rage only lasts for 1 minute, so you can rage outside of combat, assuming you're in an encounter mode. So if there's an encounter in the wilderness where you're trying to solve a puzzle, you could potentially still rage, turn into a dragon, or fly, and then deal with whatever that is. Because of what this adds with the maneuverability, with the AoE damage, still hitting strong, you're doing everything that barbarians normally do well. You're still doing it really well. You're just adding in way more versatility than barbarians normally have. The Dragon Instinct really does bring so much to the table with the versatility of AoE damage, movement in different ways, everything that being a dragon offers you, mostly in combat, some of it out of combat. You're still doing everything barbarians do well. You can even be, as a dragon, a great grappler. It's crazy what's possible with this instinct. I'm giving this subclass an S ranking. Even if being a dragon isn't a massive boost, even without that, because it's kind of late in the game, just flight, AoE, and the extra damage you get for this subclass are huge. This is my go-to if I'm going to choose something that just feels like it hits everything I want to do. Enough AoE and elemental damage? Or is it? No, next we have the Elemental Instinct from Rage of Elements. At level 1, you choose one of the 6 elements. You see them here on screen. Your rage damage goes from 2 to 4, just like Dragon did, and it does the damage of the element you chose. Now, when you choose an element, you'll see that some of them in the list, they have 2 options for damage type. You're going to choose one of those, not every time you rage. You're just choosing one at level 1 here that you're going to do whenever you go into a rage. While raging, you're always considered concealed to ranged attacks, which gives them a 20% chance to just miss you outright because they have to roll a DC 5 flat check or straight miss targeting you. Now, this doesn't prevent targeting from things like healing that your allies do. This is specifically ranged attacks. So that's a great bonus for you. That's just really nice to have, and it's always on while you rage. Finally, you have access to any impulses that you might have for your element. So that way, if you say went a kineticist with a free archetype and you gain some impulses for the element you chose, great, you can actually use them while you rage because normally you couldn't. There's a whole lot packed in to this level 1 ability. Level 7, your specialization, you go from 4 to 6 damage, and then from 6 to 12 damage at 15. Sadly, this started off solid, going from 2 to 4 at level 1, and then it really kind of dropped off. Disappointing, but fine still. It's tied with the animal for the lowest rage bonus, though. At level 9, your resistances are interesting. So your raging resistance is you basically resist anything that has anything to do with your element type. So if it's got that trait on it, let's say you chose air, any attack from a creature with the air trait, any spell with air traits, anything with the air trait is going to be resisted by you, any damage caused. So creatures, attack, spells, whatever, which is kind of cool, but it's a little narrow. You do have an anathema here, which is unfortunate, but it's unlikely to affect you. Just don't go out of your way to disrespect elemental creatures. You can still fight them. Defending yourself against them is completely fine. And then just don't go and mess with your specific plane of element. So if you, again, chose air, you go to the plane of air, don't go and try to trash the plane of air. You're welcome to go there and try to make it better. Just don't make it worse on purpose. I can't imagine this ever actually being a problem. Feats. This is where it really hurts. Elemental only has 2 feats for them. Starting at level 2, though, which is nice. So at level 2, you get Elemental Evolution. This gives you a second damage type that you can choose when you go into a rage. So let's say you chose air, and the options are cold and electricity and slashing. Let's say you chose electricity. Well, now you can choose to pick up that slashing as another option, or in this feat, every type gets another one they can choose. Cold is the one that they add for air, so now you could have electricity or cold, so every time you go into a rage, you can choose which one of those you want. This can really help dealing with resistances, immunities, weaknesses, all of that. At level 6, Elemental Explosion, and this is probably the feat you would take the instinct for. 2 actions. You explode in a 15-foot emanation. Any creature caught in the explosion has to make a reflex save, basic reflex save against class DC, or take damage equal to 1d8 per your level. So this hits even harder than the Dragon Breath, and it's an emanation, which is both good and bad, maybe a little easier to catch your allies, but it will catch everything around you. You don't have to worry about targeting it, so that's really cool. This manages to outscale Fireball in damage, which is nice, and the damage will match the type, of course, that you chose for your rage. If you chose the level 2 feat, then let's say you had electricity and cold, great, whatever one you chose when you went into a rage, that's the one you're getting when you explode. So very cool there, nice high damage. Sadly, that's it. Like the dragon, Element did a good job of plugging up some of the holes that Barbarian has, giving you some nice AoE, doing some other damage types. These are problems for Barbarians a lot of the time. Elemental really falls short, though, in its lack of feats. And it doesn't have the diversity of being able to fly or transform into a dragon or, gain some of these things that maybe some of the other instincts will have that we'll talk about later. So they don't have anything great that augments their other abilities in special ways, and their rage damage is on the low end. With all of that combined, there's some positives and negatives here. This is another one that falls into a B. I think there are some campaigns where this could just be phenomenal, where it's just the obvious right choice because it's so cool and thematic in the campaign that you're going to be playing in. It maybe lines up really well against the type of creatures you're going to fight. But in most campaigns, it's just merely okay, plugging up one of the big holes that Barbarian has. All right, we really are done with elemental damage now. Time to go into the Fury Instinct and just go all anger on it. At level 1, you get an extra level 1 Barbarian class feat. Your rage bonus will also go 2 to 3. Now, the extra feat is nice because there are a couple good level 1 feats depending on what kind of build you want, and there's really one that's almost always worth getting. And I talked about that in my Barbarian video, but still, it's great. It's not amazing, it's not mind-blowing, but it's solid. At level 7, your rage bonus goes from 3 to 7, and then from 7 to 13 at level 15. Slightly above, two of our previous instincts, but it's still not great. Your raging resistance. You get physical resistance against weapons. Now that sounds good. It's like, great, all weapons. That means damage from bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. Cool. Except it's weapons. Unarmed strikes don't count as weapons. When a bear comes up and maul you, that's not going to count. A lot of creatures in the games don't use weapons. Now, humanoids do. So if you're in a campaign that's purely against humanoids, this could be really cool. But again, it's not going to help with spellcasters or if they do any type of non-physical damage with their weapons. But physical weapons, sure. And that's good some of the time. Feats. Fury also only has 2 feats, and this time we start at level 4. We have Scars of Steel. This is a reaction at level 4 when you are critically hit by a physical attack. So it'll come up from time to time because you definitely get crit in this game. You gain resistance to the damage equal to your con mod plus half your level, which is nice, except that you can only use it once per day. This makes it pretty much useless. If you're only getting crit once per day, then I guess fine, but barbarians are probably going to be crit more often than once a day, depending on how many combats you have. It's just, it doesn't feel like something that's so strong that once per day should be a restriction. Maybe once per rage or once per 10 minutes would be fine on this. Once per day is pretty sad. The only other feat we get is Furious Vengeance. This is a level 16 feat, so you're waiting really deep in the game between 4 and 16. It's a reaction, and this time you're critically hit in melee. You get to strike back. At least it isn't once per day, it's whenever this happens. But sadly, this is going to fight for your reaction with any other reaction you have, like Reactive Strike, which you could have taken at level 6 and would be used maybe not as much as this. Well, actually being crit, it probably is more useful than this. Honestly, this is just a bad feat. It came too late in the game. You've got other reactions by now. It's just not going to be strong enough to take. Fury is just not a great subclass. It lacks versatility, has very few feats, and the feats it has really aren't very good. It's nice to have 2 level 1 feats, or 3 if you go human and want to go that route and get 3 of them. So it can be nice to get those, but it's not going to blow anybody's mind. The extra rage damage that you get isn't even great. It's not awful, but it's not good. And you're unlikely to want to take either of their feats. Having said that, nothing really detracts here. If you take their feats, you're not absolutely destroying yourself. You just may not get as much use out of them as you would otherwise like to. For me, this is a C. It's not a trap. It's on that border, though. It's like on the border of C to D. So just think about that. It's pretty far down there. I just don't think it's a full trap. I just wouldn't be looking at Fury. We're done with extra angry. Now we're just going to get extra big with the Giant Instinct. At level 1, you get access to weapons meant for large creatures. Granted, there are now some ancestors where you can be large from the beginning. Don't choose one of those for Giant. It's not going to play out as well as you'd like it to. Just putting that out there. These weapons that you get for large creatures, they don't change the number. So if you had a great sword for a large creature, it's still going to do 1d12 damage. It's just this special weapon that you get access to, or possibly something a GM can give you later, which can be really fun for your class. When wielding a weapon that is made for a large creature, your rage damage goes from 2 to 6. That is a huge jump. That's a lot of damage. But you do become Clumsy 1 the entire time you rage, so that damage you're dealing, keep in mind you're more likely to get hit and crit now because you're clumsy. That's probably all it'll affect you, is your chance to get hit by people, because you don't use dexterity for your weapon attacks. But keep it in mind, your reflex saves are also going to be slightly hurt by this. At level 7, your damage goes from 6 to 10, which is already a ton, and then from 10 to 18 at level 15. This is top-end damage. You're hitting like a truck. This is great. At level 9, your raging resistance, you resist bludgeoning, all bludgeoning, and either cold, electricity, or fire. You choose when you hit level 9. Fire comes up all the time, so it's probably your best go-to. Depends on your campaign, though. Gives you a little flexibility, but the bludgeoning's always good. All right, Giant has 3 feats, but they're all pretty darn good. Starting at level 6. So at 6, we get Giant's Stature. This is one action. While you're in a rage, as long as you are medium or small by default, you increase to large, and regardless of if you increased to large, Still, your reach is going to increase by 5 feet, and you have the clumsy 1 condition. Now you're like, oh, I already had it. This is just to ensure if somehow you didn't have it because you weren't using that large weapon anymore or whatever. While you're bigger using giant stature, you still are going to be clumsy 1. They don't stack, by the way. You're just clumsy 1. So it's actually not a big penalty as long as you're still using your large weapon. As for the reach and being large, now keep in mind, large means instead of 1 square, you're taking up 4 squares. And having a reach of an extra 5 feet means you're now got a greater distance you can hit. So this, instead of threatening 8 squares around you, you're now threatening 31 squares. That is so big. That is such an increase in your potential damage you can deal because you don't have to move as much to attack creatures, and you really do threaten so much, especially if you have some way to capitalize on it between turns. Titan stature, this is at level 12. You have to already have had giant's stature, so this is a build-on feat, but it's worth it. You become huge instead of large, so instead of taking up 4 squares, you take up 9 squares on the battlefield, and that's just while using giant's stature, so same 1 action you're using before. It not only means that you threaten those more squares, though, but on top of that, your reach would already then add more squares, but rather than have an extra 5 feet, you now get an extra 10 feet. So you have now this 15-foot reach with all of your weapons. You are practically threatening the whole battlefield. I mean, you are just enormous. Your weapon lets you strike all sorts of things, not just on the ground, but in the air. This is crazy. And at 14, for 1 action, you can do Giant's Lunge. For the rest of this rage, your weapons and unarmed strikes have a reach property of 10 feet. So you have a basic weapon with no reach property. This adds a 10-foot reach property. This doesn't stack with any reach that it already had, like I said, but it does stack with giant stature. You are threatening probably the whole screen practically at this point, depending on what type of map your GM builds. Giant instincts play with the battlefield in a fun and unique way. You're not flying like the dragon. Instead, you're threatening absolutely everything by just being massive with incredible reach. You are not only able to hit everybody else, you are an obstacle yourself. Creatures, if they don't want to hit you, have to get around you. You become the ultimate damage-dealing structure in a way. And you can move around still. You have all of your movement. You can do quite a bit on the battlefield to reposition. You add cover for your allies in ways that you can't add cover normally for your allies. Those flying enemies can't get out of your reach because you're just too big to get away from. This, in my book, is an A subclass. There's still some versatility I'd like to see here. You're still tied to just 1 damage type, which is your weapon. You still can't break the mold of what barbarians do. Like, you're not going to be doing AoE damage outside of some of the feats that you can normally take as any barbarian. You don't have that elemental, early on AoE or anything like that. And sure, you can't fly, but you kind of don't need to. But don't think I'm down on the giant barbarian at all. They are amazing and would feel crazy to play at high levels when you're just that massive, reaching everything on the map. All right, let's take a break from the physical damage and let's look at some spirit damage with the Spirit Instinct. I ain't afraid of no ghost. I should really stop doing things like that. Anyway, level 1. Your rage damage goes from 2 to 3, but now it's spirit damage. And just so you know, spirit damage is very rarely resisted. It's actually a great damage type. You don't have to do spirit damage, but when you go into a rage, you make the choice. If you do choose to do spirit damage with your rage bonus, your attacks, unarmed or with weapons, all gain access to the Ghost Touch rune. So you don't have to add it onto your weapon. Your weapons just act as if they have it. This lets you hit incorporeal creatures, like ghosts, as if they were corporeal. It also adds the divine and spirit traits onto your attacks, but the hitting ghosts thing is really a big deal, especially in certain campaigns. At level 7, your rage damage bonus goes from 3 to 7, and then from 7 to 13 at level 15. So this is on par with Fury. It's fine. It's not amazing. Nothing to go crazy about here, but it's still better than a few. Your raging resistance is an odd one. You resist void damage and any damage dealt by undead, no matter what it is. Undead casters casting spells, resist. Undead melee fighters coming and slashing you, resist. Incorporeal creatures doing cold damage or void damage, resist. I mean, void you already resisted, but you know what I'm saying. In certain campaigns, this is just nuts. As a general thing, it may not come up all the time. So, very specific on the resistance. Spirit has 5 feats, starting at level 4, though I will say the first is uncommon, so check with your GM. At level 4, Ghost Wrangler, and this is 1 action. When you use it, until your next turn, your unarmed strikes have the effects of the Ghost Touch rune, which you already would have from your instinct, but your strength-based skills can also affect incorporeal creatures. You can wrestle ghosts, which is cool. And you can keep using this every turn to keep grappling ghosts or whatever you want to do. That's very unique. At level 4, you also have Spiritual Guidance, which is a reaction. While you're raging, if you fail but don't critically fail a perception check or skill check, you can re-roll. You have to take the new result, but you can just re-roll. Sadly, though, this is just once per day, so I probably wouldn't pick this up because one skill re-roll isn't worth a feat in my mind. But at least it can be useful if you really care about like a grapple build and need to land the grapple. All right, level 6, Inner Strength. This is one action. You reduce your enfeebled condition by 1. And there's no limit to this. So if you were enfeebled 3 and your turn started, you can take all 3 actions just getting rid of enfeebled, and you're good. Enfeebled for a barbarian is actually very punishing. Your chance to hit and your damage both going down. Yeah, you really do need to get rid of it if you can. If nobody can help you, Spirit can do it for themselves. Another at level 6, notice we're front loading a lot of these feats, is Spirit's Interference. For one action, for the rest of this rage, so do it once at the beginning, all ranged attacks must succeed a DC 5 flat check to target you. So concealed to ranged attacks, basically. This is what Elemental Instinct gets for free at level 1, but it's still great as a feat. Even if Elemental had to take it as a feat, it'd still be good. This is just good. This forces creatures to either come at you or target somebody else, because they don't want to fail on a check and then do nothing with that action. And finally, the level 12 feat is what I love about this specific instinct. It's called Spirit's Wrath. This is one action. You are going to fire off a wisp that goes and makes a melee attack against a creature within 120 feet of you. It uses your attack modifier, mostly. It assumes you have a +2 potency rune on your weapon or unarmed strike, so that's the only difference. If you happen to have a +3, it won't get all of that. If you only had a +1, it would get a +2. But don't worry too much, but it's basically your attack modifier. Has any bonuses and penalties you would have, including map. So map does still play in here, but if you have any bonuses to your attack, it's still going to get those. On a hit, it's going to deal 4d8 plus con mod in damage, spirit damage. You don't get to add your rage damage or your weapon specialization damage, but if you happen to have other bonuses to damage, kind of like your bonuses to hit, you can add those on, which is cool. If this does get a crit on the attack roll, not only do they take double damage, as they always would with a crit, the creature's also going to become frightened 1. So this is a very cool ranged attack. 120 feet is enormous, so it's a very long ranged attack. I don't know how you'd be on a map that required longer than 120 feet, at least not often. And it still hits and does decent damage from that range. Spirit has a great theme to it. You can see what they're going with everything they're putting together. You're very good at both against undead, but also just invoking that spirit damage in a very special way. You are the divine rager, rather than just the bloodlust rager. The ranged attack is really a great option because barbarians have terrible range, even if you go throwing, because you can take feats for throwing, but they're not great. Even with that, you're not going to do great damage. You're relying on dex. This, you get to rely on that strength attack modifier to just go out and deal damage from an insane distance. You don't want to rely on it for everything you do. You're not just going to sit back and fire them off because you're not going to get your rage damage bonus. But if you have no way to get into melee, at least you've got a great backup option. Those creatures flying around that you can't get up to, great, just blast them out of the sky. The spirit damage is also very reliable, which is something to keep in mind. The problem is that certain aspects of the subclass, like the Ghost Touch property rune and some of the feats, only work in certain campaigns. The fact that so many of the feats are defensive in nature means they won't always come into play. I mean, how often are you really going to get enfeebled? It's not going to be that often. Maybe once every 4 times you play, if the GM's targeting you. I can't get this higher than a B because really this is all about being spectacular in that undead campaign. But in that undead campaign, you are a damage god. Down to the last one here, Superstition Instinct. This is the Mage Hunter. At level 1, you get a +2 bonus to saves against magic while raging, and your rage damage bonus goes from 2 to 3, or to 4 if you're hitting a creature that you've seen cast a spell in the last hour. Also, when you rage, not only do you gain temporary HP, like you normally would, you also regain actually healing for HP equal to that amount of temp HP. So if you happen to be lower, you heal up. This can only happen once per 10 minutes, which is usually enough because you have downtime between combat. Now for the really bad part though. While raging, if you accept the effects of any magical spell or effect, you become frightened 1 for the rest of your rage. There's no way to get rid of it. It doesn't go away at the end of your turn. It doesn't go away ever. You are just frightened 1. Other GMs might read this differently, but as I read it, if a friendly caster were to throw heal on you, or haste, or you were included in the effect of a magical aura that gave you some kind of boost, if you accept any of that, you're in trouble. And Frightened 1 is worse than Clumsy 1. Clumsy 1, alright, your AC is lower and your reflex saves are lower. This is so much worse because your attack is lower, your damage is lower, your saves are lower, your everything is lower. Frightened 1 is a bad condition. You don't want to have it on you. And this means your allies cannot help you. You are now working alone. At level 7, your damage bonus goes from 3 to 7, or 8 against spellcasters. And then at level 15, it goes from 7 to 13, or 16 against casters, once again. Your Raging Resistance, you might think, ooh, it's against, I get resistance to damage from all spells. No, not so much. You're going to choose one set of 2 magical traditions out of 4 possible sets. They're listed here in the feat. You gain resistance to spells doing damage from those types of traditions. Keep in mind, it has to be spells from those traditions. So you have to fight against actual spellcasters. All right, the feat, Superstition gets 3 feats, starting at level 6 with Mage Hunter. At level 6, for 2 actions, you make a melee strike against a creature you have seen cast a spell. So remember, you have to have seen them cast a spell. On a hit, the creature is also Stupefied 1, or Stupefied 2 on a crit. It only lasts until the start of your next turn, but at least that will help against their spell casting. At level 12, you get Sunder Spell. Also 2 actions. You strike a creature, object, or an active ongoing spell, like a wall of fire or something. If it doesn't have an AC, then the GM will tell you what the AC is. They suggest the AC just be 10. It might be higher depending on what your GM wants to do with the level spell cast. If you succeed on hitting it, you are going to attempt to counteract the spell. I'm not going to go into how to counteract things. That's very complicated. There are some great videos on it. In fact, I will link one in the description for this video if you really want to go into how counteract works. But it's complicated to say the very least. In fact, of the systems in Pathfinder, it may be my least favorite and one I wish they would get rid of. What I will say is, this doesn't mean you're going to get to end the spell. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. You have a chance to. Don't count on it, which makes this just not a great feat. Also, if you succeed or not, succeed or fail, you can't try again against the same spell for 24 hours. So basically never again. Whew, that's rough. All right, at level 14, Sunder Enchantment. This is building off of Sunder Spell. You no longer have to just target what was listed in Sunder Spell. You can actually target things with active enchantments on them, like magic items, like a magic sword. You can now try to get rid of the effects off that and make it mundane with your 2 actions that you're now spending to get rid of this. Unless it's an item or some enchanted thing that is revolutionary or the whole fight is hinging around, this just doesn't seem worth it. One thing you've probably noticed is how situational every aspect of this is. If you're in a campaign with no spellcasters, this doesn't even exist. This is a non-subclass. Best case scenario is you're in a campaign where you're constantly fighting these spellcasters. And even then, you have to choose the right type of spellcasters that you want to be fighting against, and your allies can't help you. In fact, you have anti-synergy with your team, assuming you have any spellcasters on your team, or anybody who wants to buff you at all, pretty much. This is probably the prime example of what I mean when I say a D ranking subclass. So if you're looking for the perfect example of a D, I know I gave one an alchemist. This is a much better example of a D. This is just how you make your barbarian worse. This is a trap. Do not play this. This could be useful for a one-shot where you're going to go fight a tower of wizards. Beyond that, I would not touch this. And even then, tell your teammates what happened so they don't heal you on accident. So any promise of this being some crazy mage slayer that's going to feel amazing to play, that just falls away. Just dodge it. It's hard ending on such a sour note. I hate ending on a D, but hey, that's how this played out. There are some amazing options in the mix though. Up on screen, you will see the chart of the outcomes. Notice that we've got everything from S down to D in here. I truly believe that whatever you're looking for from a mostly melee, big damage dealing brute, you're going to find some variation here. There's a substantial difference between Dragon and Superstition in my mind, but almost any other options would work out just fine. What do you think? Am I just too harsh on Superstition? And Fury? Maybe I'm overrating the ability to fly and turn into a dragon and breathe fire. Leave your thoughts below, and as always, adventure on.